From the mysteries of the universe to the mysteries of the unknown, this is Mysterious Realms with Mr. Cyber. Here is your host, Mr. Cyber.
Hey everybody, Mr. Cyber here with another show for you today. Today we're going to be talking about past lives and reincarnation. This is going to be a really good show today because we're going to be talking to Dr. David Bettenhausen and Carla Bogni-Kidd. Their story is awesome. So Dave and Carla, they've been close friends since 1998. Feeling a deeper spiritual kinship for each other, Dave and Carla had spontaneous memories of 29 past lives together while meditating. They went on to get past life regression training with Dr. Weiss. Now David and Carla spread the message of love and kindness and teach holistic approaches to healing. They teach meditation at their local university and senior centers. Dr. Dave was a registered nurse for 10 years before returning to medical school. He recently retired from his private practice as a doctor. Dr. Dave now serves as the Vice President of Medical Affairs at a small midwestern hospital. Carla recently retired as his office manager. They now share their message together, the gift of past lives and love is the answer. And if you want to check out their website is The Gift of Past Lives. So, without further ado, here is Dr. David Bettenhausen and Carla Bogni-Kidd. Hey, thank you both for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Yep, it's great to meet you, Elijah.
Hey, same here. So I find this very fascinating. I was going through everything, and your story is very amazing, and that's what I'm excited to talk to you both about past lives and reincarnation. So if I could start, where did this all begin? I think that's usually what I like asking because everyone's like, well, where did you get this idea from, or what gave you this, hey, this was meant to be, or I've done this before. How can you all start this off? When did you, either of you realize about these past lives?
Okay, well, back in 2014, Dave and I worked together. Dave is a physician, and I was his office manager. And we had implemented electronic medical records, and it was very frustrating. We were all stressed out, and we decided that we would begin meditation. So in the beginning, the entire office was meditating the first couple of days, and then the third day, it was just Dave and I. The other girls didn't want to come in early, and we were doing this prior to the patients coming into the office. And after meditation, Dave came up behind me and he said, I know you'll think this is strange, but I think I was talking to your mother. And I've always been very open about things like this. Dave, I don't think as much, but my mother had passed away nearly 20 years before, and Dave had never met my mother. My mother died in 1996, and we didn't meet Dave until 1998 when he came in and bought my husband's medical practice. So after that, Dave got my attention, and he started to explain to me what the woman looked like and how she resembled me from side view, and that she was jovial, laughing, and that she showed him a shoe. And I said, what kind of shoe? And he said, well, I don't know. So I went over to the computer, and what I realized was that since my mother had been a ballroom dancer, perhaps the shoe that she would have shown Dave were ballroom dancing shoes. Now, he was not aware that she was a ballroom dancer, but I went over to the computer and I Googled ballroom dancing shoes, and about 60 or 70 pair popped up on the screen. And my mother wore this same pair throughout her life They were satin, and she would re-dye them. It was a little pump, and she'd wear them for church or to dress up and to ballroom dance. And Dave went over and he pointed to a pair of shoes, and it was the exact type that my mother always wore.
Wow.
So that got our attention right off the bat. That couldn't have been just a good guess. And my sister was one of the girls that worked in the office with us, and about that time she had come in, and she went to the back and she got her wallet out and got out a picture of my mother, and she brought it up to Dave and she showed him, and she said, "Is this who you were talking to?" And Dave got real emotional, and he said yes, because he realized that, something had just happened here, and none of us knew exactly what it was. So I'll let Dave go on from here.
And so that we kept meditating. We started actually journaling things, and I was seeing strange pictures. I saw this strange sort of pyramid-shaped building that looked sort of South American, and I was trying to ask Carla about it, and she actually brought up a picture because they had traveled there.
Yeah.
And it was a Mayan temple. And I said, I actually saw that in one of my visions. And I saw this Civil War scene. And then I was meditating one morning, and I suddenly had this memory where I was standing in an alley. And I looked across the alley, and I thought I saw Carla. So that was very interesting, because I was telling her about that. Then I was meditating, and I had a memory of running on a beach in 1962, and I was actually 3 years old. And as I was running on the beach, I was screaming and yelling, and there was this Ferris wheel in the background and a roller coaster. And I started to tell Carla about this memory, and I remembered, because it was back in 1962, my dad had gone to graduate school in Boston, and I was gone to the beach, and it was the first time I'd ever seen an ocean. And while I was running on this beach, this little girl came down over and pushed me down and sat on my chest and gave me a kiss on the forehead. She jumped up and she put both hands on her hips, and I heard a woman in the background yell, "Carla, that's not how little girls act." And then I looked at this little girl standing there, and she had this two-piece blue bathing suit on, and I'm telling Carla the story, and Carla looks at me and says, "Dave, that was me."
Wow. Wow.
And I was like, "You mean we met in 1962 for one day on a beach? She was 4 and I was 3 years old."
And Elijah, Dave was from Nebraska, and I was from Boston.
Oh, wow. Nebraska and Boston. That's a big difference.
And so, we were thinking, this is very strange. And Carla started to tell me about the story, because it was the first time she had ever had a brand new bathing suit.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to tell that story, Carla.
Well, we were the good Catholic family. I was the youngest of 5 daughters, and my parents were always splitting up, but they had gotten back together again. They never divorced because of them being Catholic. Eventually they did. But this happened to be a day when they were back together again, and we didn't have a car. We were not well off. And my parents rented 2 cabs, and we went to the beach. Now, when Dave started to tell me about his memory, my sister that worked in the office and I both knew what beach it was, because it wasn't just sand and water. Revere Beach was a beach with a Ferris wheel and souvenir shops.
Correct.
And Dave would not have any way of knowing that. He's from Nebraska. He didn't know anything about beaches. And this day when we got there, for whatever reason, I normally would have had a bathing suit, but I didn't have one. I normally would have inherited one from one of my sisters, but everybody had theirs but me. So we traipsed across the street to this little souvenir shop, and I got my first brand new 2-piece blue bathing suit with little ruffles on them. So when Dave started to describe this bathing suit, I got a chill up my back. I knew exactly the day and everything about it. I didn't need to meditate to have those memories like Dave did. And So after that, then our meditation continued, and Dave continued to get faces and pictures and things, and we just kept journaling everything. And then there came a day, an evening, when Dave was meditating at night, and this is when he actually fell out of bed because he was in that alley and he was shot. He fell right out of bed when he was shot. He felt the pains in his chest, and he saw me across the alley yelling at him. Now, by me, I say it was who I was then. It looked like me, not exactly, but there's always something you can see in the eyes. And then not long after that, when we were meditating, Dave came into the office one day. He told me to sit down, and he said he had more of that story that he wanted to share with me.
And it was really specific, and the memory that I had was that I met this woman that looked like Carla.
Yeah.
Her name was, and when I met her, it was at a wedding of a man named Angelo. And I had asked her out for breakfast, so I met her the next day, and we went to breakfast, and we walked down the coastline of Chicago. And as we're walking down the coastline of Chicago, she tells me her name is Ruby Donaldson, and that she's from Bullock, Georgia, and that her father's name is James, and that she works for a mobster named Angelo Jenna as a flapper. And we knew that I had met her at a wedding. Carla is a very curious woman, so a few days later, Carla is doing research a day she doesn't work in the office, and what did you find?
Well, I actually got onto Ancestry.com, and I did indeed find a Ruby Donaldson, born in Bullock, Georgia in 1904, and her parents were James and Anna Donaldson. She was one of 11 children. Luckily, Dave had received all this information through meditation and his spontaneous memories because I was able to corroborate it. And I also found a couple of newspaper articles. One was on the wedding of the mobster Angelo Jenna. Mm-hmm. It was January the 10th, 1925, and he married Lucille Spinola in Chicago at Ashland Auditorium. There were over 3,000 guests, and their wedding cake was over 10 feet tall. And so I found two articles about this. So I said to Dave, I called him and I said, well, I could corroborate all this information you're giving me. Now, unless you're a mobster junkie, which neither one of us were, we never heard that name before.
Yeah.
So, of course, we journaled everything. We kept writing everything down because we were, at this point, we were just trying to find out more. We didn't realize that the pieces would all start to fit and that there was actually a reason for all of this.
And so it's kind of interesting, Elijah. The name of the first book we wrote is The Gift of Past Lives with Mother Isabella, God, and Elizabeth. So I met Carla's mother, and mm-hmm. then soon I met a woman named Isabella. And Isabella started to tell me things while I was meditating. And the first thing she told me was that she was my spirit guide and that she had been with me for 6,000 years.
6,000 years?
6,000 years.
That's amazing.
Now, again, Carla and I were both raised Catholic.
Yeah.
So when I have this 3- and 4-year-old memory, it's this life. 1925 is way before I was born. There's this woman who speaks to me who's told me that I've had 42 past lives and that she's been there for 6,000 years. And I'm a physician who never really believed that this was possible.
Yeah, correct.
And so we started, again, continuing to journal things. And so very soon after that, we met Elizabeth, who is Carla's spirit guide. And we actually had a day when Carla, because she kept asking questions, and Isabella would just come up with an answer. And every time I meditated, there was a new answer. And one day she said, well, who's God? and I actually heard, I am. Now, being raised Catholic, it was the most warm, overwhelming sensation, and I literally started to cry in the office. And Carla was trying to calm me down, and we started doing research at that moment because all of these things were happening to us as an experience. And we found that there were a lot of researchers who had been doing past life research for 50 or 60 years.
Correct.
There were some 2,500 kids that had spontaneous past life memories that they were able to find. We had the one with Ruby and JJ, where we found a past life. And so we were like, okay, something here is real. We did a few years later go for past life regression training because we wanted to meet more people who had this experience. But we actually wrote our first book just on everything that Isabella was telling us. And what was interesting is not only did I meet Carla twice in this life, I met her 28 other times in past lives. And our experience has been that she's been my mother, my sister, certainly my love interest and or wife, friend, spouse,
Neighbor.
etc., neighbor.
Yeah.
In many lives. And we actually had a day when I was sitting in the office and I was telling her some of the Ruby and JJ story. And as I was doing it, I now see these things almost like a movie where I actually am in part of the movie. And that day, as I was talking, I started to speak like I was J.J. Wright from 1925. And Carla started to answer the questions before I was done.
Wow, that's
and we
amazing.
were having the same simultaneous memory at the same moment.
Wow. Well, Dave and Carla, the thing I got to tell you was what really got me that I found is amazing is when Carla mentioned when she started doing research on Ancestry.com. Because I know a lot of folks who do that, and they're shocked and blown away by what they find. And because they're told something, or they remember something, they're like, nah, let me go check. And then they're shocked. They're like, oh, it's actually true. So that just blew me away because Ancestry gives you the facts. They don't know you. They just give you what they have and what's out there.
Yes.
And the fact that those dots connected is absolutely astounding. That's absolutely amazing.
It really is.
And and when you were talking about Dave growing up in Nebraska, I can tell you, I've driven through Nebraska. I ain't seen no ocean or beach.
No, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. So seeing the beach is exciting. For a kid. So our story just keeps growing, and we start finding out about more past lives. And what's usually interesting is now we can't find us in the 1650s, but the details start coming in, and it's always really interesting. JJ always would get dressed and say he was putting on his trousers. And in the life in England in the 1650s, every time Carla's taking notes and I'm just talking, and Robert in the 1650s talks about getting out and putting on his best breeches.
And these are not terms that Dave would normally use.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's always, there's something there that happens. We had a life in Bermuda as an indentured servants. It was involved, there was some slave trade that was going through Bermuda. The English came to Bermuda. And the day Carla was asking me questions, and it was a very personal story, but as I'm telling the story, Carla's trying to tape this, and I start talking with this almost British proper accent. And it just happens.
It was like perfect.
And there's times, because most of the times the memory seems to be in English, but it's really interesting. The life 6,000 years ago, as we're talking, they kept using the word ahava and ahava, or ahab and ahava.
Yeah.
And we didn't know what that was. And we kept Googling it and found that ahav and ahava is Jewish is Hebrew for to love and to give with love without expectations.
Mm.
And so there were times that words would come out that didn't have a translation, and the word would come out in whatever language it was.
And Elijah,
yeah,
as time went on and we started to learn about our 29 past lives, journal them all down, we found out that after each one of those lives, Isabella would give us the reason that we came back again, what we did that was not following the correct sort of path. And when Dave tells you that Isabella would give us information daily, a lot of that developed into almost lessons for us. And what she told us that was important living on Earth is that we need to follow 5 simple rules. And she said, I will condense it down. It's almost like the 10 Commandments, but easier for you to remember. And she said, if you live a life without conceit, jealousy, selfishness, and unforgiveness, then you're on the correct path, because everything else falls into one of those tendencies. So in our first book, The Gift of Past Lives with Mother Isabella, God, and Elizabeth, we actually put in there 20 stories of our past lives. And after each story, we gave the reason, what we did incorrectly, why we weren't on the correct path, and why we had to come back again. And one of the most important things she said was that all of your decisions are to be made out of love. Because, we have free will when we come here to Earth, but we cannot choose love without free will.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
And one of the other things that we learned early on was that one of the reasons that Dave and I have come back together so many times is that we have what we call family mates and karmic mates, or some people call it a soul family. So you return over and over again with those same people because you're either very comfortable with them or you were able to accomplish a lot with them. We believe that's the case with Dave and I. Or you return with karmic mates. And I will say that, a karmic mate is somebody that you really need to apologize to each other, get things better the next time.
Yeah.
And Angelo Genna, the mobster that we told you about, he actually was my first husband in this life. And
Wow.
I am happy to say that on my end, I did overcome my karma with him in this life.
That's awesome. So,
and it's interesting because it is really, Angelo was controlling of Ruby the flapper, which is why I got shot, because of course somebody's interacting with one of his flappers. But her first husband in this life, was a little controlling. And so actually walking away, Carla overcome the karma of letting someone control her.
Oh, I got it.
Sense?
Yeah, you know what? It's starting to make sense now for me. I'm starting to piece all the little puzzles together, or the pieces. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go back and listen to this again because that's really deep. That's really deep. But no, it makes sense. It's like each life you went through, it's like it was a lesson to learn, or something you didn't get right. You get to come back to fix that or make it right. So it's like a learning thing every time. Does that sound?
Isabella, yes, that's exactly right. And Isabella said that this was really God's plan to start with, that there is no hell,
Well, Dave, I don't mean to interrupt you, but that is one of the first questions I wanted to ask you about. Do you think reincarnation was God's plan from the beginning?
Absolutely. This is how we overcome the human condition. You know, we have to be created in such a way that we have a certain fight to survive. And the fight to survive and your ego is there to start with, because that's how the human race, if you want to call it, survives and propagates. If there is no fight to survive, so you make the decision you want to eat.
Yeah.
You make the decision you want to drink. If that means you have to compete with others to get food, pretty soon that's, I deserve food more than they do. You know, we can hunt for this, we can steal for this. All of those things are necessary for the human condition to actually survive to start with, which means that we're going to injure people until we learn to cooperate and compassion, and that we don't need to fight with each other to survive. And so part of this is we had to be created to survive, and then created with the path to return back as the love we were created.
Yeah. Okay. So it all boils down to me, and what it sounds like, it's boiling down to one thing, and that's ultimately love. Does that sound about right?
Yes, absolutely. And how else do you learn love? Through compassion. And how else do you learn compassion? Every time we come back, we change. We're black, we're white, we're kings, we're paupers, we're slaves, we're slave owners, we're Jewish, Christian, Muslim, pagan.
Yeah.
We're saints, we're sinners. We live both sides of many, many wars, because how else do you understand what the other person is feeling unless you live it?
Oh, see, I love what you said that. I love how you said that.
And look at the Bible. The Bible is, Dave can explain this to you better, but the Bible is one instance after another of reincarnation.
Well, you know what? That's actually true, Carla. And David, about that, she's actually hitting something on the head right there. Because a lot of people, you know, they look past that part, but the Bible is specific, and there's so many references of reincarnation in there that it blows my mind that people don't talk about it that much.
Yeah, there are many references, and there's actually a whole lot that we can read if you try to even research into reading Hebrew and or Aramaic, where we find lots of very interesting things. If you look in the Old Testament, God makes 4 covenants with the Hebrews, and each time they fail, and he makes a new covenant.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And he makes a new covenant, and he fails. And they make a new covenant, and he fails. It never does God say, you fail, well, I'll wipe you off the earth, and that's it.
Well, yeah, I mean, you want it to be, it's like he wants to improve that, or he wants that to improve with the free will, hence the reincarnation piece.
And the other thing that's very interesting if you read the book of Leviticus, which is the book on sin, cleaning each other, atonement, and all of those kind of issues in the Bible, it was originally written in Aramaic. And as we translated it over time, it starts talking about sin. The word was kata, which is Khata. Mm-hmm. And in Aramaic, kata means fail to reach your goal.
Oh, I got it.
That was translated to sin. And so if you're talking about reincarnation, if you're talking about God, you'd say, if you fail to reach your goal, do you go to hell, or does God say try harder?
Well, yeah, you know what, that makes sense. And I don't think a lot of people think about it that way, because think about it, God is the ultimate perfection and loving, and I can't even put a word to it. And, you know, to me, God is not an entity that would just give up. He wants he wants you to learn. He wants you to, okay, you messed up there. It's like raising a child. Okay, you messed up. Now I'm going to mold you to make you, better at it or learn from that. And that's, that's just
Elijah,
deep.
And so Elijah, literally, we do have spirit guides and angels. A lot of us do not meditate enough to open up to this. However, all of us have experienced the little thought or the little voice in our head that says, when you're 10 years old, don't steal the piece of candy.
Yeah.
There is help there. You're never alone. And our second book, which is Hell No Reincarnation, is a lot of the religious discussion we were just having. We went through many of the Bible stories. We pulled out the references to reincarnation. We also include some of the research on reincarnation by Ian Stevenson in that book too, so that people could see that there's actually a lot of knowledge and information out there on this, that regardless of how crazy some of the people get with reincarnations and all those kind of issues, there's a lot of history, there's a lot of theory. Kabbalist Jews actually still believe in reincarnation. 33% of the world's population does. On a poll done in 2014, 20% of Christians report that they believe in reincarnation. Now,
yeah, that's true.
The Catholic Church says absolutely not. However, this is something that's been there, and if you talk about Hindu, which is one of the oldest religion, it certainly does. And Hindus believe in God. Buddhists don't believe in God, but they believe in reincarnation. If you talk about American Indians, some of the indigenous populations in the world, reincarnation and or some sort of belief that the ancestors come back to you is normal part of their belief system. All of these things point to a world history that does include this. And so it really is something that exists as part of our culture. If it is part of our culture, then maybe more than just me has heard this, because we talk about other people. The Bible, there's been sort of a religious look at this, that the Bible stopped, that God quit talking to anybody.
Yeah.
200 or 300 years before Jesus, there's no more prophecy. God has stopped speaking. He spoke for the last 4,000 years to mankind, and then suddenly he stopped.
Yeah.
Well, if you actually look, the Catholic Church has venerated so many Christian and Catholic mystics, and if you even go as far back just as in the 1900s, Thomas Merton is a Catholic mystic who studied Buddhism, who really comes out with statements that are not particularly Catholic in support that we are responsible for our own actions, that we're not saved only by grace, that we indeed have to learn and grow, and that a loving God wouldn't give you only one chance and you fail and go to hell. And if you read the Bible in the original forms, early on, the words for hell were Sheol and Hades, because they were written in Greek
that is
and
correct.
Hebrew. And the other place that gets translated to hell is the Valley of Gehenna. And the Valley of Gehenna is the ditch outside of Jerusalem, and it's part of the sewage system. When Jerusalem was built, they made a large spiral thing, so all the excrement from Jerusalem dumps into the Valley of Gehenna. And historically, the kings and judges of Judaism put their illegitimate children to death there. Christians were burned there. And the King James Bible translated all three to hell. And actually, King James's wife was Germanic. And the god of the German underworld, who was a pagan god's name was Helia. And he named hell after a pagan god. And translated into the King James Bible. So,
I gotcha.
Hell is the burning place, that Dante talks about, is really not particularly biblical. Because Sheol is just the place where people go when they die, and Hades is really just the place that Greek people went when they died.
Correct.
It wasn't a punishment. And now, all of atonement is like that. And the Jews keep talking about atonement, and even if you talk about Catholics, they talk about, confession. They're all admitting there's some way to sin and still get over it.
Well, that is correct. That is correct. It's, like going to confession, asking for forgiveness, redemption, etc. To me, yeah, that's like given a chance again. And the same thing would apply to reincarnation. And I wanted to ask either Carla or you, David. I know Carla went into this a short time ago. She started talking about the 5 simple rules. Can you explain what those exactly are?
Go ahead, Dave.
So again, the 5 simple rules are: live a life without conceit, selfishness, jealousy, and unforgiveness, and make all decisions and intentions out of love. And when we talk about conceit, it's not just vanity. It's believing you have control over someone else. If you look at human history, we've enslaved incredible populations of people for thousands of years, or suppressed groups of people over thousands of years, including women suppressed over many thousands of years. That's part of our human history. That's all about conceit.
Yeah.
If you think you're somehow special, even to the point where we usually say there's some truth in all religions, but religions tend to be conceited and say you're only saved through me.
That's exactly right.
Can I interject here something, Dave, real quick?
Sure.
Even to the point where religion has said that God is a man. And
Yeah.
Dave, what have we found out from Isabella?
Isabella says God is both male and female. Otherwise, God wouldn't be complete in every way.
Well, that's exactly right. And I would agree with you on that. God is not one gender. He's essentially every, or God is every.
Every. That's perfect.
Yeah, every.
God, yeah. And so if you start talking about selfishness, it's an interesting, because there's many lessons in here that Isabella's given us, because selfishness is not just about thinking you deserve what you have. It may be selfish to eat with gluttony, smoke cigarettes, be an alcoholic, and allow someone else to take care of you.
Yeah.
It's selfish to be an alcoholic and raise your children in an alcoholic home and pass on this, because that becomes a karmic thing and your children are living it. And if you pass your alcoholic tendencies and or your abuse to your children, are you surprised that you might return into that same family and have to experience the same thing?
Yeah, but from a different perspective.
And so we do pass on some karma to our children if we're not careful. That's sort of an important lesson.
Well, I want to... Oh, sorry. Go ahead, David.
Go ahead. And if you talk about forgiveness, that includes forgiveness of yourself. So the fact that you make mistakes doesn't mean that, or make a poor choice. We don't even like the word mistakes anymore.
Yeah.
It's really a choice. And so you have free will, so you have a choice to forgive the other person. Doesn't mean you have to forget that. Certainly if you're in an abusive situation, you should get out of it. You shouldn't be controlled. All of those things. And so you had a question, so I'll let you go.
Yeah, so this is just something I was thinking about, and I was thinking about this from the beginning because you're talking about the past, 6,000 years. Do you think, and this is about gaps, so let's say someone's born 1900, let's just pick 1900, and they live to 1970, okay? Then they get reincarnated. Do you think there's a gap that happens so they won't come like right back the day they die, but it might be 10 years later? You know what I'm getting at?
Yes.
Absolutely. And during our experiences, we've learned a lot about the time between lives. We call that time the period of atonement. Some people will call it the past life review. If life is about the lessons, you have to realize that you're going to review those lessons. And it's like watching the movie of your past life, going through being told which things you did wrong. We actually know that there is a group of elders, people who have already finished all of their incarnations, who we call counsel, that will help you. Your spirit guide helps you go through and look at what choices you made in a past life that were wrong. And then actually, so I'll give you one example. If you went to war and you shot people, and of course they didn't come home, they may show you their spouse who's sad at home. Because that's the part where you learn compassion. And I actually had the privilege of watching my father's last past life review while I was meditating, and my father died now about 7 years ago.
Hello?
Hey.
And so 7 years ago, or 6 years ago, I saw my dad's past life review, and we found that my father was a slave trader at one time and split families apart. My father chained men into the base of his boat and traded them into America. In his next life, his wife died during childbirth, and his daughter was actually abducted. Carla, can you hear us?
Carla, you there? Did we lose Carla?
I don't know. I'll keep going for a minute.
Okay.
I heard her say hello.
Yeah, we lost her. She dropped off.
Okay. Maybe we'll need to call her back.
Yeah, I'm doing that right now. But you can go ahead and keep talking if you'd like.
So with my father, he split families apart as a slave trader. In his next life, he lost his family. And it's my father, as in this life, he spent his last 20 years of his life in a wheelchair because of Parkinson's, literally chained to the chair.
Wow. So he's kind of reliving what happened in the past of what he did to somebody.
To others.
Oh, wow. So he got to be in their shoes.
So he got to be in their shoes.
As a learning
experience. And so if you realize those things, and then you realize that we found out that my father does not have to return, and part of that is my dad was a really good man.
I bet he was.
And with his Parkinson's, it didn't change the positive person that he was.
Yeah.
And that's those are part of those lessons. It's not what happens to you in life that matters. It's how you respond. And that's where the karma comes in.
Yes, Carla.
Elijah, you had asked about what happens, in between. That time varies. For instance, I was born in 1958. Dave was born in 1959 in this life. But our last life ended in 1944. Dave and I were brother and sister. We lived in Chicago. I was 6. He was 4. And our father was an airplane pilot, fighter pilot in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And he was actually gone over Christmas Eve. He was fighting in the war, and we were home with our mother. She was actually wrapping presents. It was Christmas Eve, and we were playing on a 3-story staircase, and we fell to our deaths.
Ooh.
And both of us broke our necks, and if you can imagine, our poor mother lost her 2 only children at the same time. But what Isabella told us was that, first of all, when your life is cut short like that, you don't have the opportunity to learn all the lessons that you normally would if you were given an entire life.
Oh, yeah.
So you go to a shorter life review. It's different. And, of course, they know that ahead of time because normally you come back to help somebody else. So in that life, when Dave's and my life was cut short, we were actually back there to help somebody else. It happened to be our father, one of many, because he had to learn what it was like. He was bombing places and killing families and children that were innocent in war.
Yeah.
When he lost his own 2 children, he found out what it was like to lose your family, your children. But so we had a very short life review there, a very short atonement, and then we came back, just a few years after that. But many moons ago, in a life in Egypt, I poisoned Dave. He was my husband.
Oh, man.
And I actually...
Wow. Wow, that went brutal.
We have all been saints and sinners, and history has been brutal. I actually poisoned Dave, and I sat in atonement for 980 years.
Oh.
And as time goes on, atonement has become a little bit shorter because we're bringing more and more people to the earth. If you want to elaborate on that.
Yeah, I can explain that just a little.
Okay.
People ask this question sometimes. 4,000 years ago there were 1 million souls on the earth, and now there's 7 billion. How does that work? Well, first, all souls were created before the first life on earth. Mm-hmm. Second is that time between lives used to be larger. The third thing is there are still souls that have not had their first incarnation. And so the possibilities of these numbers increasing is possible. People say, well, isn't there some sort of end in sight? And I know this is strange because this talks about a little bit about group karma. It's probable that the earth can only really hold 12 or 13 billion people and still feed them all. And so there is some karma could occur if we don't control population growth and figure out how to feed this many people and those kind of things. There's also group karma that exists related to all these wars. And there's possibly group karma associated with us not taking care of the earth.
Oh, you're absolutely right.
And so, a lot of times we'll say things like, not only are you leaving this life to your children, you're going to leave this world to you. So the next time you throw that piece of paper cup out the window, realize that we're polluting the earth and we're going to return to this earth. And there may be some day that there's no earth to return to.
Well, you're exactly right about that, because what we do now affects the future too. Like just one little, it's just a cup. No, but you got to look at the snowball effect.
The snowball effect.
And
and I'm glad you even said that, because the snowball effect, or the ripple effect that we call it, is if you make one loving choice, you smile at one person, they smile somewhere else, and the smile continues. So every time you make a loving intention and make a loving choice, that affects somebody else, who affects somebody else, who affects somebody else. And that's how we're going to slowly change this earth around and move us down that path that we can all return home.
Well, you know what? I want to go back really quick. And so in your past life, your father, he was a fighter pilot in World War II. And yes. I kind of like how you brought that up, because we don't think about this. And, I was in the military. Luckily, I never hurt anybody, but you stated a valid point. You know, when we go to war and we, when we bomb buildings, people, places, and children, you know, we don't really think about it at the time. But taking that one life, you know, a lot of times we overlook, you know, who that affects. Yeah, the person may have been bad, but they have children, they got a wife, they got relatives, you know. What's that? You know, there is an effect. You know, you're not just getting rid of the bad person, but, you know, they got these innocent children, you know, families who I'm sure are great people. And
hairdressers, doctors,
yeah,
garbage men, all of the above. They're not just military.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And then going back to your father, you wanted to show that your father, what it was like to have that feeling of losing a loved one, or especially children. And I just loved that point you brought up, because that puts it in such clear and plain context. And
that's why we have to all learn compassion for the other people, and that's why we come back on all sides, because how else, you know, the quickest way for you to come back on the other side is to be prejudiced towards somebody, whatever it is, men against women, black against white, white against black, Muslim against Catholics, Catholic against Muslim. You're going to come back on the other side, because how else will you understand it?
Yeah. Well, you're correct about that, Carla. And and I wanted to bring something, I wanted to ask you both a question here. Can you all explain what this past life regression training is? And I believe that's with, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Brian Weiss?
Mm-hmm. Dr. Brian Weiss?
Yeah, so what exactly is past life regression training?
You want to do it, Carla?
You go ahead and talk about what it affects.
Okay,
yeah,
I will. So, again, this is the physician in me during. So
it's all good, doctor.
We started doing lots of research on this stuff when it was happening to me, and so the first thing that we found out is that meditation causes an increase in alpha waves in the front of your brain and theta waves in the back of your brain. Then we found out that hypnosis also activates the same two parts of the brain, and that the time between weak and sleep and wake is also a time when those two things happen, so dreams happen. And we found that hypnosis, meditation, all accesses the subconscious mind. And this is very interesting, because I love this when we started figuring some of this out. We save these past life memories in our subconscious, just like we save every memory in this life in our subconscious. So the first time you touch something that's hot, it burns you. The second time you touch something hot, you pull back faster, because your subconscious learns and it tells your body to pull back faster. If you remember your past lives that way too, then a past life that ended violently, where you were involved in a fight or a war or anger, it'll make you pull back faster and stop the chance that you're going to get injured or that you're going to injure someone else. Then we started looking at the past life regression and found out that it's actually very healing, because some people carry past life trauma with them, and most people remember their past life trauma first, and sometimes that past life trauma actually follows you into this life. So if you drowned, you may be scared of water in this life. If you died in a small compartment, you may be scared to get on an elevator. Dr. Brian Weiss was a psychiatrist and the head of Mount Sinai down in Florida. And he did past life regression. He did regression therapy through hypnosis to people when they had what he thought was childhood trauma that caused their problems. And accidentally, he took people and they went to a life before this one and found a problem. And so he started documenting it. And over many years of his professional practice, he found Many people had these past life memories. Almost everyone could be hypnotized to a past life memory, and past life regression became sort of a popular hypnosis technique that people use to find out their past lives. And the real lesson here is you don't necessarily have to know your past lives if you know that you're an eternal being that has a purpose, and that's to learn, grow, and love. But past life regression is a way to find some of those memories out and possibly heal you in this life. Carla's going to talk about a few people she regressed at the educational seminar. It's a week long at Omega. You go there and you stay for the whole week, and it's 40 to 60 hours worth of training and meditation and everything with Dr. Weiss and his wife. And it was a beautiful experience. And he actually holds the seminar 3 or 4 times a year, except that there's been COVID, so it hasn't been happening now. But
correct.
And what's interesting about it, people from all over the world come, and it's great because you're in a room where people understand your experience because many of them have had it also. And it's also comforting to know that hospitals from other countries will send their people, their social workers. One particular girl from Chile was a social worker, and she was sent to learn regression because they use it in end-of-life patients. And I actually regressed her. I took her back. This was really early when I first started doing it, and I didn't expect to take her back to where I took her to, and it was actually around the time that Nero was persecuting the Catholics, the Jews.
Yeah.
And the Romans were in Jerusalem, and her son had been abducted. And it just so happens that the memory that we went to almost immediately was her son's abduction. And I was trying to help her get past that. And unfortunately, he was tortured and killed, and she was too. But during that session, we found out that the man she's engaged to now was that little boy then.
What?
And in the beginning of their relationship now, she had a fear of losing him, and it actually was interfering in the relationship because she was afraid she was going to lose him. But she understood at the end that fear of loss went back to that life in Jerusalem when she lost him as her son. And those are the sort of things that regression therapy can help you with.
Oh, I got you.
Now,
okay.
Yeah. So like Dave, like Dave said, we don't do it as a business. We do it with family and friends.
Oh, correct.
We actually regressed one particular gentleman that was a samurai. And he still looks like he should be a samurai in this life.
That's awesome.
It was really awesome, but he was actually, stabbed at the end, and it was brutal. We had to get him past that.
That's not good.
But well, it's happened to all of us, but
Yeah.
it's helpful in a lot of ways, but usually the trauma does surface first.
Okay.
And Elijah, here's another interesting fact just for people to realize. In almost every situation and in almost every spiritual law, to shorten someone's life is considered wrong. Because and in this case, to shorten someone's life, because every life has some sort of lesson to be learned, and to shorten that soul's ability to learn that lesson it causes more karma. This is important because that means, killing someone else and or suicide is absolutely wrong.
Yeah.
You can't kill yourself to get out of your situation because you didn't learn the lesson you were supposed to learn, and you may return to the exact same situation.
Yeah, and then you'll be like, why did I do that? Now I got to go, now I got to go back through all this. So, yeah, well, that's a valid point.
Possibly worse. Yes.
So here's something else, and I've thought about this before. Do you believe, Well, I'm sure you do because I do. But there's a lot of people out there who remember just like you did, but they're too afraid, or they just don't have the, they don't have the, how can I state this? They need that push to come out with their memories. So they know their past lives, but they're afraid to talk about it.
It's like anything else. If you mess with their core beliefs, then you have them worried. People have fear of what they don't know. So if you tell somebody something that you've experienced and it doesn't go along with something they've experienced, immediately you're strange, you're weird.
You're an outcast.
Like with the Catholic Church, you're a devil. You're somehow a blasphemist. But if you get on to many of the reincarnation pages, that a lot of them we belong to, there is a lot of people having experiences that are talking about them. Now, mind you, some of them are way out there and they're not believable. But there's a lot of people like us that have had experiences through meditation or through past life regression. And they're not telling you because, they're trying to wow you or scare you. They're telling you because they've had like a repeated memory.
Yeah.
And often those repeated memories are from a past life. And what's interesting is that when I was a child, I had a repeated memory of falling into the water and waking up with my eyes open. Well, I now know that memory comes back to my life as Ruby because I was, after they murdered me, I was tossed into the water. And it's a direct correlation with that. And a lot of people have those same type memories. But even like in small town USA where we live, I mean, you just cannot go out and talk about these things. People think you're absolutely crazy.
Oh, of course. And what I find intriguing...
You can't go tell your pastor.
Yeah. Hey, pastor! You'd be like, what? Well,
some of them you probably could. I wish they'd come out and tell us. I
wish
you know
what?
People would stand up.
Well, I'm sure if you had a private meeting with your pastor or whoever, then you'd be in a more private setting with just, the two of you. And then they'll be open. But yeah, I just wouldn't first go up in front of a whole congregation. Hey, guess what? That's, slowly work it. But what got me intrigued is there was this story quite a few years ago. I don't know if you heard about this, and I don't recall the whole circumstances, but I guess it was like a 3 or 4 year old child. I think it was a little boy. And he started talking about, hey, I used to be this person. I used to be this person. And this was in the news. It was crazy. And they went back and did all this research, and that kid was 1,000% correct. He's like, he doesn't even know this stuff. He does. How could he have made this up?
There's been a couple of those.
Yeah, the one of the really good ones is...
one book, Soul Survivor, Dave.
Yeah. Is that the airplane pilot?
Yeah, that's the World War II fighter pilot that he was having nightmares. But he could remember the ship, the names of the people that were there with him.
Yeah.
And his parents actually took him to Japan, to where the plane went down. And he knew that his name was James, and his name is James in this life. And he's one of many, many, many. And the University of Virginia is the one that does all the studies on these children and their spontaneous past life memories. So they're out there.
It was great because he went back, they did all this research, they found the logs of the boat that he remembered, and the people's names on the boat that he remembered, and the only plane that went down was the man with the pilot named James.
Correct. That's just, when I heard that story, my jaw just dropped. I was like, what? It's like you'd be talking about, like this kid should be talking about like Mr. Rogers, Sesame Street. He's talking about his past life. And I'm like, and the parents started digging and they were astonished, amazed.
And again, we, as a society, we usually say, oh, this kid has some sort of strange, make-up friend or those kind of words. And we hope people don't discourage their kids from just talking, because sometimes they're going to share some of those memories with you, and they seem to have those memories till they're close to 5 or 6, and then this life overwhelms those memories, and they have so many of these memories that are occurring that they seem to forget.
Yeah, it's
And
like a
often
lunch of...
those friends,
Sorry, Carla, go ahead.
often those friends, those imaginary friends, are not imaginary. They're their guides, they're angels, and the children can still see them because they're still very connected to the spiritual world, because the spiritual world is on plane 2 and Earth is plane 1. They're still very connected.
Well, yeah, and children, their minds are some of the least corrupted minds. They don't have all this clutter in them from, everyday world, experiences like we have, because there's so much going on. It's hard to keep track of what's going on now. So I can understand how it can be difficult to recall those memories, the more you experience in this life. But I'm glad you mentioned that, Carla. Are you able to go over what the 7 planes of our universe are?
Certainly.
If you don't mind, I'm interested in that, and I think our audience will be.
That's actually our 3rd book, Elijah, and it just came out this week.
Oh, did it?
Yeah, it's called The Manual.
The Manual.
Yeah, it just came out in paperback this week on Amazon and on Barnes & Noble, but it should be an ebook soon.
Well, and I just want to let our audience know really quick, down below in all the descriptions, you can see all the links to their books. We'll have that for you, and their website and all the other information. So I just wanted to point that out. You got some good books for the listeners to read. But you can go ahead and continue on your point, Carla.
The 7 planes. And of course, I know that when we explain these things, people either find some belief in it or they think we're crazy. These things have been given to us through Dave's Spirit Guide. We didn't make them up. We didn't create them. We just document them, journal them as they're given to us. So this is what we've been told. Mm-hmm. Our vibration increases as we reach each higher plane, getting closer to God. Plane 1 is the Earth. Plane 2 is where we wait. After we die, we go immediately to plane 2, and then that's where we wait after our life review, which takes place on plane 3.
So in a way, it's like a waiting room, plane 2.
It is. We go there after, we're waiting. We call it our pod. We wait in our pod before we reincarnate, and that's where we are initially. Plane 3 is the past life review, or some people call atonement. Mm-hmm. And there's no particular time that you're there. It could be short or it could be long.
Could be a year, could be 500 years. Who knows? No one knows.
Yes.
Well, I don't know about 500.
Yeah, that's a big gap.
At 980 stint, so.
Gotcha.
Plane 4 is where our angels, spirit guides, other guides, and we'll say that there are other guides. Everybody has a main spirit guide that's with you from the beginning. Mm-hmm. There are other guides that come in to help us. Like Dave has a past life guide. She was actually in several of his past lives. And if he wants to go to a certain place from a past life, she takes him. So when we say other guides, we're talking about that type. Our animals all reside on plane 4. The people who work for God reside on plane 4, and that would be like your council members. The council are the people that you go before for your life review or atonement. And some souls reach plane 4, and they have completed their paths, but they remain there just in case God asks them to go back to Earth to help another. And then plane 5 is what we refer to as going over the horizon or heaven. Plane 6 is where, I'll explain this. God asks a couple separately upon completion of their own paths if they choose to become one with another soul. And these will be people that have been together in many lives, in many capacities, but they cooperated together. They emulated all the qualities that God holds dear. In other words, they weren't jealous or selfish or conceited. And throughout their lives, they were able to accomplish this on Earth. And if they accept, then they go to plane 6, and God refers to these people as soulmates. Mm. And their sole purpose is to radiate love to the Earth.
Okay.
Plane 7 belongs to God only. And what God hopes for is that when all of the souls are done on earth, then everybody, along with God, will go to plane 7.
Oh, that's so cool. That is, I tell you what, that was, wow. That was very clear and understandable. You just explained that amazingly. You explained that amazingly. I was like, oh, please don't be confusing. But that is so clear and understandable. I just find
There's
that
a chart, Elijah,
Yeah.
in book 3 that actually shows it. We have it color-coded so you can see. It's all outlined with the purposes and the colors. And what I should have said to you,
Yeah.
because speaking of color, when's your birthday?
March. It's coming up, March 22nd.
March 22nd.
Yes,
okay,
ma'am.
so you are just barely in Aries.
Yeah, I am barely in Aries. That's correct.
Barely in Aries. So the thing with our astrological signs is that they are directly related to our past karma.
Yeah.
And because God doesn't send us here alone, he sends us here with a guardian angel, and he sends us here with a spirit guide and many other people to help us. Our astrological signs, like I said, are related to the tendencies we had in our life before. So I'll just tell you they're broken into groups of 3s because, as you know, there's 12 astrological signs.
Correct.
There's also 12 traits and there's 12 archetypes. But your 12 astrological signs are broken down as Aries, Pisces, and Aquarius. They have a yellow angel from Mariel's Legion, and that's the angel of selfishness. That doesn't mean you're being selfish now. That means in a past life that you were selfish either with your own time. There's many ways to describe selfishness. So you're given that angel by God so that you'll overcome it. You won't make the same mistake or negative action in this life. Taurus, Gemini, and Cancer have a pink angel from the Legion of Shamuel, and that's the angel of conceit. And again, conceit is not just looking in the mirror. It's a lot of things. Leo, Virgo, and Libra, they have a green angel from Raphael's Legion, and that's the angel of jealousy. That's self-explanatory.
Yeah.
Scorpio, Sagittarian, and Capricorn have the red angel, and that's from Uriel's Legion, and that's for unforgiveness. So remember, this doesn't mean you're doing it now. I know a lot of people that have these signs, and they do not have these tendencies because obviously their angel's working for them, and they're overcoming it. But those, if you're wondering about what you did wrong in your past life, and you know what your astrological sign is, then that can kind of point you in the right direction.
Oh, I gotcha. Well, you know what? I'm glad you brought up the astrological signs. I wanted to mention this really quick. You may know this or you may not, but I found it completely amazing. So my wife and I, we'll be going on 4 years this July. We went to Europe because she's never been to Europe. I've been to Europe quite a bit. But one place we've never been together until then was Rome, Italy. So we had a chance to go to Rome. We visited the Vatican, St. Peter's Basilica. And you might find this interesting because I did. I was like, oh my goodness. And once you started talking about astrological signs, it just clicked in my head right now. As soon as we entered the Vatican in St. Peter's Basilica, there was a huge mural in the entrance. And you know what it had on it? It had all the astrological signs.
Don't you love it?
I was
Absolutely.
like, what? And then someone started explaining it to me. And then it wasn't until what you just said, Carla, it clicked right now. I was like, okay, this is starting to make sense. I'm starting to get it now. I get it because I wondered why that was there. And
well, whether they admit it or not, Elijah, I mean, astrology is not who we did not invent it. God did.
Oh, correct.
And it's for a reason, and apparently somebody in the Catholic Church understood it. I have also been to the Vatican, and I've also been to the Sistine Chapel where all the artwork is. I don't remember seeing that because it was many, many years ago before all of this happened. But, it's for a reason. It's not because, we're connected to the stars. It's because we're connected to God, and God chose to make us this way to help us.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And going back to the 7 planes, and this is something else I thought about. Like, I have all these things popping in my head now. Like, when a person has what they call a near-death experience, and I want your take on this, a lot of times they'll see the tunnel and they'll see a being saying, it's not your time. And my guess is, are they saying it's not your time yet? To go to another life, you got to finish this one first to learn, what you were brought back to do. Then you move on to your next life. If, unless your soul is completely matured, let's say. Do you think that it's not your time yet refers to this kind of situation? Like, it's not your time for the next life. You have to finish what you started or learn from it?
Absolutely. And if you go back, this is another great point, Elijah, because if you go back and you look at all the experiences of people who have past life reviews, past life regression, and they report some of the time that you can take them between their lives, and you go to those people who have had NDEs, and if you ask these children who have spontaneous memories, all of them report, and I shouldn't say all, but most of them report that there is some sort of a past life review. There's beings of light.
Oh, yeah.
They experience family members from that they see again, some sort of planning phase before they come back. All of those experiences happen across people who have NDEs, these kids who had spontaneous memories. They all see that there is something that occurs between lives. Kids report this, NDEs report this, and past life, people who have past life memories or past life regression report that there's a period of time between where you're not in your physical body. That should just encourage everybody right then that our soul lives on, that our experience doesn't end with one life.
Yeah.
And we don't go immediately from one to the other. Everybody goes to past life review.
Yeah, see, that's what it sounds like now, because going back to your point, the folks, they do have these past life reviews like what you were talking about and that they experience. And also, that's like, it all comes down to a learning thing, like learning from your mistakes. Now, going back again, I believe it was your dad, David, who, he's moved on. So he's finished the process, you were saying?
Correct.
So
he's on plane 5.
Okay. And then once we're all done,
you will go to plane 7.
Go to plane 7. Okay.
Together.
Yeah.
And usually, Elijah, when people ask about that, the quote from Isabella is that we were all created as a spark of love from God, and as that spark returns to love, it returns to God.
Okay.
Elijah?
Yes, ma'am.
You brought up one point, and I just want Dave to specify for you. A lot of people go to war, and they're doing their job. They're a soldier.
Yeah.
And Dave always says, because we've asked all of these questions, and actually we touch on this point in the first book. If you're going to war and you're in combat and you're killing people and your intention is to go to war and follow what your commander tells you to do, and you do that, that's one thing. But if you sign up to go to war because you think it would be fun to go kill people for free and you have some sort of an issue, then we have to remember that only God gets to justify. So if you go to war and you kill somebody and you're doing your job, God is going to take that into consideration and justify it.
Oh, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
So I don't want people to think that if they're soldiers and they go to war, that's it, they're doomed, because that's not the case. That's not how God is.
Yeah,
Yes,
you're exactly right. I mean, if your goal to join the military for the sole purpose to just kill others, then that's not justifiable. That's just pure hate.
Correct.
But if you join,
if you're going to serve your fellow man, you're making a sacrifice, God certainly is going to look at that. That's different.
oh, of course, he ultimately looks at the soul in what's in your heart. Are you doing this out of love? Exactly. What is the intent?
Yes.
What you just said, the intention is always it, and what's in your heart.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. That's absolutely correct. In the man, if I knew anybody who joined the military out of just that, I'd be so furious, because I think we all can agree. We know some people have joined the military just because of that. And
Correct.
in fact, being former military myself, no one should be allowed to join for that reason. That should be but of course, you don't know that. You don't know what somebody's thinking.
Nobody reports that I want a gun so I get a chance to go hunting for other humans.
Yeah, exactly. That's just, to me, that's ultimately disgusting. Ugh. But unfortunately, that's reality,
Right.
But that's something that they're going to have to face with God, and they're going to have to, explain. So you're
another thing, Elijah. This is another interesting thing. I'll just point out.
Yeah.
Okay, those people, God can justify. I also want you to think about the next time you go to the grocery store and the clerk is rude, and you get rude back. You may now have tied yourself to that clerk in the next life.
That's
just want you to think. There's a lot of ways that this can work.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'll tell you what, I'm glad I never try to put myself in that situation intentionally, because at least from a personal perspective, whenever I'm talking to people or around people, I put myself in their shoes, because if someone's being rude or whatever, you know what? Like, I tell people I know, I'm like, you know what? They might be acting like that, but what's going on in their life that you don't know about?
That's wise.
I'm sure they're the sweetest individual, but if something bad happened, I wouldn't be in a good mood either. And I'm like, you can't take everything personal. Like, if someone's rude to you, you know what? I'm the type of person, I just show them love back, because that one effect can change a huge outcome for that one person and others. And it's the domino effect. But if you're a jerk to them, guess what? They'll probably go home and be a jerk to somebody. But if you show them love and compassion, they might go home and do something completely different and be nice to somebody or do something kind. And that's a lot of people don't think about that.
Yes.
Now, Carla, so your new book is the manual book. So that's the third one. We'll have all that information below. But you were talking about, so in that book, you have a picture drawing regarding the astrological signs?
There's actually two color pictures. One is of the angels, how they correlate to the astrological signs and the colors.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of a karmic wheel.
Yes. And then the other one is the seven planes chart, and that's all in color also, with explanations, and very easy to read. Fantastic.
So how do you think, this is wild, because I can't, we can't put ourselves in God's shoes, but how do you think he plans all this out? I mean, this is a pretty big one.
He's got a great computer, doesn't he?
Oh my God, he must have the best computer.
Elijah, people will frequently question, we live in a world where I shouldn't say most people believe in God of some kind, but there's an awful lot of people who are unhappy that don't believe that God exists.
Yeah.
And that this is just a cosmic accident. I think reincarnation, the past life memories, the time between lives, is one of the best evidences that there is some sort of intelligent design that matches people up, that continues to match them up life after life. the soul groups, the soul families, matching karma so that it works. Now, it may be that that us humans are way more predictable than we think. And so it's not as hard as we think, because we all make some of the same mistakes and we make them over and over again.
Yeah.
But God keeps putting us in a situation where we can learn the next lesson.
Definitely.
But what Dave always likes to say is that if you think you're making all your own choices, and many people do on a lot of these sites, they think that they make these choices and they just want the experience. But yet when you talk to NDEers and some of these other people that have had experiences, they say they don't want to come back. Why would you want to leave love? And why would you want to leave someplace where you have no wants or cares? So if you're just coming for experiences, let's say you want to have the experience, and so does 7 billion other people, of being a millionaire that's healthy and all they do is travel around the world. If you only made the choices yourself and everybody made the same choice, how would anybody learn anything?
Yeah, nobody would learn anything.
No, and let's say I want your father to be my father next and you want your father to be your father next. Who wins? There has to be somebody, a mediator.
Somebody makes the choice.
That's so true. That's so true. I mean, it'd be a waste of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I mean, what are you going to get out of that? Nothing.
I know so reincarnation and what we've been taught makes so much more sense to me.
Well, after this discussion with you all, it makes total sense.
Yeah, and you said it. We're just like God's children, and if you're a father or you're a mother and your child makes a mistake, you don't just say go to hell. You try to teach them. You give them chance after chance, and it's the same thing with God. How else are we going to learn?
Yeah. Well, God, it's I know you've heard the phrase made in God's image. Well, I think with all these, coming back, reincarnation, these other lives, I think God is molding us to be made in his image, because since we're human, it takes longer to mature our soul. But I think that's the whole point of this. Because within one lifetime, you can't be perfect in the one lifetime. No one is. But I don't think it's about being perfect. I think it's about finally getting and learning those lessons when you mature. Yes. You don't got to be perfect, but I think God's ultimate thing is he wants you to finally understand the whole bigger picture.
Yeah, and there's actually a quote in one of the books, Elijah, that says, we know that children die. We know that sometimes they die as newborns the first day. Is 1 minute enough? Is 1 day enough? Is 1 hour enough? Is a month? Is 10 years? Is a life? Or is it many lives so that you can grow into the person you need to be?
Correct.
And if the infant dies, the Catholics would believe that you did something wrong. It's actually just the contrary. The child died so that somebody would learn, so that they could do something right. And it wasn't the child's problem. When a child dies early, it's somebody else learning a lesson. It's not necessarily the parents. It could be the nurse. It could be the doctor. It could be the neighbor. Yeah. Because there's many lessons in everything that happens.
You know what? Another point I want to bring up, you all probably know, well, I already know you all know more about this than me. That's like, boy, ain't that a given. But I always think about extraterrestrials, and I just want to get, what do you think, or does this whole thing relate to like aliens or, the Sumerians, etc.? Like, what are aliens? Like, how are things like that involved in this somehow, or included, or?
Okay, Elijah.
I don't got the words.
I'm going to give you Isabella and our take on this.
Okay.
So we have throughout history, if you go all the way back to Sumeria, they talk about the Anunnaki. Mm-hmm. If you look in the book of Enoch, you start to read about the Watchers and angels that supposedly fell to earth. If you look at Bible, you say God placed man on the earth. Those are all the same story. It's all the same story. It's some being from heaven or the sky or somewhere else placed us down here. It's the same story written in many, many different paths.
Yeah.
It's all the same story. We're created by something above us. Even if you talk about early Greek history, most of our early world populations lived at sea level somewhere in the tropics and then spread it throughout the world.
Correct.
Well, the gods all lived up in the mountains because they didn't live with us. They live in the sky.
Yeah.
That's the story. And I don't want to tell you that there is no possibility in life on other planets, but I don't believe there is yet. And if you really look at the proof that's out there, there is no actual proof of life on other planets yet. The closest thing to proof out there is this one asteroid that went by in 2017, went on a trajectory that was not predicted.
Large cigar, right? Is that the one you're talking about?
Moonwawa, the large cigar.
Yep.
That's the first evidence that exists outside of any probability that something could have propulsed and or changed its trajectory. That's the one scientific fact that exists about life on other planets. And then you have to consider this, because people think that they may have had a life on another planet. It's unlikely, as science and evolution predicts, that we could have cross-species reincarnation. Whatever the science receptor that lets our soul connect to the human life doesn't allow us to connect to non-human life. So even though the Hindus believe that they might have been animals, we usually tell them, Isabella says, what lesson do you have to learn when you have no choice? And you live only by instinct.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you this. If I come back as a goldfish, I'm going to be pissed.
Yes, that's exactly the case. You're going to be put in a bowl.
Well, Elijah, you were rude to that goldfish. But I got what you're saying. That completely makes sense. And going back to like how, all these different, throughout history, they have all these different stories. But if you look past the differences in the languages or whatever, they all talk about the same thing. And I point out kind of like a crime scene. When you go talk to multiple witnesses, they all have kind of different stories, but they all, if you put the dots together, they're all talking about the same thing that happened. They just have different perspectives, but they're all the same.
That's why we're all unique, because we all have a slightly different perspective. That's why all of these paths are different for everyone, because no two persons have the same experience.
Yeah.
And that's why we can't judge anybody else, because we've never had their experience.
Yeah, it's exactly right. That's why don't treat somebody awful, because you don't want to come back and go through that.
That's right. As we die and we go into the spiritual world, we lose our five senses. We have no need for a body. We don't have eyes, ears, nose, mouth. We don't have any of those things. And the only word we can use that would be close, that humans would understand, would be, telepathy.
Correct.
But occasionally, when I'm meditating and somebody comes to me, and Dave knows this too, because they don't have eyes, but in the spirit world, they will show you something that you will recognize. So possibly I'll see, like, my aunt, and she'll come, or I'll say my grandfather, because I saw my grandfather who sits on our council, and there was light radiating from his eyes. Otherwise, they look like they're dark. And they look that way because they don't have eyes, because they are light. They're light beings. So a lot of times people get confused and they think that these light beings are something alien. We're all alien. We are not from this world.
Correct.
And the way that we look is like a light being. We don't look like, and the mind will fill in what it doesn't know.
And that's where experience of most of the ET experience, most of these, the Anunnaki experience from the Sumerians 5,000 years ago, they have something they can't explain, and so they explain it as somebody came down from the sky and planted us here.
Yeah. Hence why you got all those drawings, all those ancient drawings on rocks. You're like, what is that? But it's, yeah, that makes sense. That absolutely makes sense. And once you start thinking like that, you get where they're coming from, and you can start to put it into perspective.
Correct.
Yes.
Wow.
Into some sort of perspective.
That is so cool. That is so cool. Well, I'll tell you what, you all really enlightened me. I think you enlightened a lot of people on this because you were able to put everything into perspective, and that is so cool. That's really cool because hearing people just talk about it is one thing, but you've actually experienced it and went through it, and you have all this knowledge on it, and I think it's a huge, it's a huge blessing. It's a huge blessing because
it is, Elijah. That's why we do these podcasts, is because we just want to tell what they've told us.
Well, it's great because people will take this, and the takeaway is, it all still comes down to love,
It still comes down to love. That's always the answer.
Yeah, that is the answer. And so I just want to go through this really quick. Your first book was called The Gift of Past Lives with Mother Isabella, God, and Elizabeth, correct?
Yes.
Your second book is Hell No, Reincarnation with Mother Isabella, God, and Elizabeth.
Yes.
And then your third book is the manual book.
Correct. It's the manual with Isabella, Mother, and God, Elizabeth.
Okay.
Because that spells image.
I gotcha now. Okay. Okay.
Yes. If you Google that new one, you have to put it in as like the manual with Isabella. That's how it comes up the easiest. Yeah.
Well,
there's lots of manuals out there.
Oh, I know. Hey, the manual, I don't want a car manual. But no, I'll ensure I'll get it right for them because I'm interested in this book. Wow. I think it's great. Is there anything specific you would like the listeners to...
We do have a website too, Elijah. If they want to go to thegiftofpastlives.com, there'll be links to Amazon and more information about us too. Okay, great. So thegiftofpastlives.com. They can go there and look up all your information, including all of your books as well.
Or if they have any questions, they can email us from there.
Okay. I'm pretty sure you're going to get emails. So you better be ready. But that's fantastic. And I wanted to ask, is there anything specific you would like to say to the listeners? Something that you like telling people, or some advice, or, is there anything you can think of that I may have missed?
Just have an open mind. And if you've had an experience, don't be afraid to share it, because the more people that share their experiences, the more that the entire world will be awake. And if you're a biblical person, look at what the words say. If you look in the book of James, it says, you're not saved by grace alone. And we do talk about grace because we were created out of grace. But it says, your actions do matter. You must show me your faith by your actions. And then if you look in Matthew, the apostles asked Jesus, why was the man born blind? And Jesus' answer is, because of what he did before he was born.
Yeah.
So,
well, you know what? I can tell you this, Carla and David. So I am a Christian, And I agree with you all 100% because everything you talked about, guess what? It's undisputed. It's in the Bible. Just people always overlook it. And even pastors talk about it. And it kind of goes back to the near-death experience. Like, people used to laugh at it until all these people started getting more comfortable because people were coming out about it. I believe in this case, once people start coming out, talking about their experiences and their past lives, people are like, hey, I went through that too. I can relate. And then the more people will come out. Because with near-death experiences, even doctors are like, well, they're starting to agree with it. Yeah, this stuff's real. And this is like, and they always say this is stuff the medical books and teachings never tell you about when you're going to medical school. And even a lot of them are mostly in agreement now on that. So I think the same thing's going to happen with this. And that's why I was happy to have you all on, because this is one of those fields that isn't talked about that much as other ones. And it's just as important, or probably more important, than the near-death experience, because what you all discuss has real life implications.
Elijah, this is something that is in book 1 that you should just understand and know too. Isabella told us very early on that there have been only 2 people who had only one life, and it was both Jesus and Muhammad.
Yeah.
Just consider.
No, that's true. That's 100% true. But the rest
they both got it right the first time.
Yeah, they nailed it. I'm pretty sure I haven't. I just got so much going on, I can't remember anything. But you know what? I'm going to have to try to take some of your advice. I'm going to read your books because I already know they're going to be so fascinating. And I want to take a lot of these practices you tried, because unlike many other people, our lives are bombarded with everyday things going on. And that's a distraction, And when you were talking about going into meditation and just, closing down the mind or quieting it down so we can open. So you can start to remember these things. And, going back to Isabella, and I'm sure everybody, if they work at it and they do open their mind to it, they can start to recall their experiences if they've had one, or if this is their first life, they may not have. But I'm pretty sure many folks have had past lives, but they're so busy they can't recall them. Or
they're bombarded with everything technological.
Isn't that the truth? That's so true. It's completely true. And I've had times where it's not it's kind of like deja vu, where you're like, hey, I've been here before, or I know that person, but you don't. And I always think, is that something from a past life somehow? It's just, that's always intrigued me. I'm like, I've been here, but I haven't. It's weird. It's weird.
It is.
Yeah. That's absolutely cool. Well, I appreciate you both being on with me today. I hope we covered everything. I'm trying to think, because I don't want to leave anything out.
There's still more, Elijah, but it's, if I could talk about some of the religious stuff even longer.
Yeah. Well, you know what, David? I want people to go read your books to get all the information, because it's so much to talk about, and it could go on forever, like you said, because some people may have to go back and read a couple times to comprehend, to wrap their heads around it, and then it clicks for them. So reading your books is going to be very important to that, because that's something, unfortunately, you can't really get through in an interview.
Correct.
So, yeah, reading that is going to be very important. But we're going to have all your links below for your 3 books and your website, when everybody can go to thegiftofpastlives.com to contact them, or to pick up or purchase their books. But I really don't have anything else. But I appreciate you both being on with me today.
Elijah, it was a pleasure, and thank you.
Oh, you as well. Yeah, that was fun. Thank you very much.